let's kick this off. So, as said in the breakout room already, hi, you're participating right now in a DeepFunding proposal. Thanks a lot for this already. So, the main idea, give a short introduction. Since very earliest DeepFunding days, it was quite sure that there should be some efforts on figuring out some enhanced governance systems to make sure that we don't run into a hardcore plutocratic system. Plutocracy means usually the power of the assets in this regard, in our case, meaning as more HAX you hold, as more decision-making power you have as well, to say what can be done actually to come to a more equal decision-making environment. And there have been mainly two attempts on this. The first one was in serious considerations and research on quadratic voting, which was implemented already quite early in DeepFunding. A second part was the development of a contribution score, meaning we have people who engage, who participate, and a contribution system assumes that as more people engage and participate, as more knowledge and experience they build up as well. And ideally, this knowledge and experience is in some sort a really nice prerequisite for them to make high-quality decisions. So therefore, Foodtrike started to develop a contribution score in very early days. It's an algorithm which basically transforms engagements from community members so far on Sway on the previous proposal platform used at DeepFunding and some other stuff as well, and transforms this engagements into a contribution score. Meaning, for example, you submit a proposal or you comment on your proposal, you get thumbs up or thumbs down on your comments. This gets fit into the contribution score as well as the age of your wallet. Let's say, for example, you have a wallet and since 4 years you hold HAX tokens there, you don't move them, and it's traceable that you're a long time investor into Singularity. This is taken into account as well. Once this contribution score then for individuals is defined, it's manually added to their voting weight if the contributors voted on DeepFunding proposals. So I said, okay, that's pretty awesome and really going into a nice direction. What can be done to enhance this? And early this year, not early this year, middle this year, we started a small group where we had New Mindflow, Anna and Raurish. There's some awesome people from the Cardano space and Ethereum. Oh, there. Okay, there. Our side and on my side, they are there. And Foodtrike. People joining together and say, oh, cool, how can we collaborate to further enhance this? And we submitted a proposal in the Ideation Pool. Right out, the proposal was the highest voted proposal in the pool. So everybody here who voted for us, thanks. This was actually pretty cool. Now you are part of this. So you made a hopefully good decision. Let's make sure that it is actually a good decision. We had 2 workshops so far. We start to document them as well, and all of the workshops are recorded. Let me post a link to this actually in the live chat here as well. So you can find previous recordings and some notes in a Gitbook. And today we have the 3rd workshop, one of the 2 open community workshops, where we continue these discussions. Some of you joined the last workshop as well. Awesome to see you back. And welcome everyone who didn't join so far. For today, we would have one major question to start with. So far, we figured out already quite some interesting stuff on tokens in general, such as, for example, FTs versus NFTs. How do we want to handle tokens in regard to what needs to be on-chain, what needs to be off-chain? The last workshop was really cool. I think it was Curtis actually. Also, somebody brought up, maybe we want to go with oracles as well. We didn't thought about this. It was actually really cool, really interesting to think about this. About, let's say, the system itself, that the token itself already needs to be designed into a system which should be easily adaptable and changeable, because our environment is changing quite quickly, and anything what we set up should be open to change, rather easy than difficult. What else did we discuss? Bunch of stuff. It's there in the notes on the Gitbook. And today we have one question we didn't spoke at all on. How do we see token systems actually applying to AI. That's the first question to start with. We don't have any ideas on this yet. So if you have any, that's why we call this a workshop.
Thought that comes to mind for me is with AI that enables more metrics that you can integrate that wouldn't be easily done without AI. So, for instance, you're collecting attendance or contribution or Discord messages or age of wallet, all these different metrics that contribute towards the contribution score. AI can actually sift through large amounts of data that's not necessarily a manual process typically found. So just being able to aggregate metrics up into the contribution system makes sense.
Tommy, you have your hands up.
Yeah, Felix, I feel really stupid. And usually I just feel stupid, but here I feel really stupid. What was, I missed it. What is the goal of this exercise? And that's why I feel really stupid, because I just missed it.
Let's think, for example, you are quite engaged on DeepFunding in general, right? So you have been quite engaged as well on Sway, commenting a bunch of good comments there, actually, from your side. And now you have a contribution score, Tommy, right? But where does this contribution score live? What do you get in return? Is there anything what connects you directly to your contribution score? Not really yet. So in this regard, to say, how does a community contribution token looks like, which is able to reflect engagements and contributions from DeepFunding community members at DeepFunding?
Right. I got that part, but what is the purpose? Is it to add additional rewards? Is it to allow me the latitude to tell bad jokes? What is the end goal of the whole thing? Is it to continue building on reputation and enhance it somehow? Okay, so it's not a value-driven proposition where I'm going to make money out of it by selling that token.
Exactly. Yes, it's not a monetized token in this regard.
Okay, so is it any different than the gimbal or gimbal tokens that we receive on the Cardano side? Or are you looking, since you brought in AI and I'll assume eventually AGI, or are you bringing in a different non-monetary value proposition for Cardano Singularity Net side?
For example, Gimbal Labs, what is used, for example, in the Singularity Ambassadors program, the Gimbal token, is minted by Gimbal Labs. So it's a closed policy ID token. There's a set amount which is available, and you have to deal with this, right? And the whole token setup and distribution was designed in token allocations. So for each Gimbal token which is, let's say, available on the blockchain, are the released one from allocation round 1 and not the other ones. In our regard, when we think about it, ideally, we would host an own token, which we can define however we want, and wouldn't have to rely on another project in actually.
So let me ask you a question, because early on in my career working in downtown, people got street cred by actions. And I know this is old school and I don't know how to translate it. And I had a conversation, I think it was with Judith or someone, when I used to walk the streets of Queens, and I was the only white guy in Hollis, Queens, but I knew who the people that I could trust. They had street cred and I had street cred. How in this virtual world can we translate that intrinsic value of when you look over your shoulder and you knew you were safe in the neighborhood, or you knew you were safe making a trade in Wall Street because of the intrinsic value? And I think you might call that trust, but we called it street cred. So, you know, I've never met you personally, and I've never met Mr. Newman personally. You two guys, for whatever reason, I would trust almost with my wallet seed phrase, almost, not quite. But how can we take that, Felix, what you're doing with the reputation, and bring that intrinsic human trust level? And maybe we've had this argument before, maybe just in that instance, how do you bring that into tokenization and AI?
Ross, want to go for it?
Yeah. So in regards to being a representation of trust, and answering your question to what is the goal of the token, ultimately, at least for now, the goal is to augment your voting power, right? So to give you more voting power based on your contributions. So in essence, the community.
I'm just gonna interrupt you there, because I asked Felix, I set this whole thing up by asking him what the goal is. You just changed. Okay. You just changed what Felix stated as his goal. So this is a new shade to the conversation.
I would have responded pretty much exactly the same.
But he's really kind of, maybe there's two things going on here, Tommy. You know, there is a project that we're funded for in Fund 3 to build the token, and the primary goal of that project is to kind of figure out how you track reputation for the purpose of voting. However, what Felix is adding to the conversation today as another layer is that if you get this working well, it could also apply to the AI agents that we're developing on the SingularityNet platform. So there's kind of two levels to this conversation.
Okay, well, I did start it off by saying I feel really stupid today about this. So, you know, we'll continue with my stupidity, but thank you. And new mind flow, continue. I'm sorry I cut you off, but it just sounded a little different than what Felix stated his goal was.
Yeah, I think Kendrick described it well. That's why I said for now, the goal for now. That's augmenting your voting power is the first goal of this proposal. So basically, like Felix was describing, there is already a contribution score that's being calculated and stored on a centralized server, right, on the Sway platform, from what we understood. And the goal of this exercise is to figure out what's the best way to move that contribution score and to represent it on chain, where it's a lot more flexible, what we can do with it. And it's, besides being more flexible, it's more permanent, right? It doesn't rely on a single, on the life cycle of a single centralized entity.
And also more transparent.
Yeah.
I did see a study. Oh, yeah, Curtis, you have your hand up. Go for it.
You first, sir.
Okay, thanks, man. I did see a study a while ago saying, which was getting criminal studies and putting it through some AI models to see what it would suggest as an outcome, and found that the AIs were generally a lot less forgiving than their human counterparts, which is a kind of, yeah, interesting discussion for this in terms of contribution, reputation. One thing I imagine with AI that it could really help with is spotting these outliers, or like if there are, for instance, metrics that they could be kind of attuned on an ongoing basis where there are agents to do that maintenance processes.
Yeah, I think along those lines too, like what Fly's saying, in that situation where, like you said, the AI is actually a bit harsh compared to humans, that's because we're giving that authority to actually make decisions, whereas proper systems should probably incorporate the human in certain levels of decision making. But back to what Tommy was saying about street cred and so on and so forth. If AI is being collected, or sorry, contribution metrics are being collected, whatever that looks like, comments and so forth. Having street cred, what is street cred, and where, well, at least what is relationships and what is a trust network? Trust networks are independent. Like my trust network with Felix and Newman are different than maybe your trust networks with Felix and Newman. We each have our own independent relationships. So if an AI has access to all of these metrics or input parameters, you can actually query and talk to this agent about somebody else, like building your own internal trust network with that person. How often do they contribute in these areas? What is their involvement in this? Show me some comments that got the most likes or whatever. So you can actually learn about that person and make your own determination of how well you want to trust. I mean, maybe this is even, we want to co-propose with this person in the future. Let's take a look at their contribution in the past and bond with that just by chatting with the data.
This is a great discussion, and following up on some of that, I don't remember who said it, but this idea that the AIs right now are not as forgiving is an interesting one, because in the research on the prisoner's dilemma model, which is kind of the foundation for game theory, one of the ways that problem was solved in kind of showing how collaboration evolves is that agents develop a reputation over time as to whether they are cooperative. And there's like a kind of tick for tat if you're not cooperative. But at the same time, there's also a model that's important where you're forgiving a certain amount of times, even if someone maybe does something wrong to you, you're forgiving of them. And that is part of what helps build a collaborative community. And there's another thing that I was reading about recently that I think we should incorporate into this work is the following, that when you look at the evolution of societies rather than the evolution of individuals, it becomes important to select for group behavior rather than individual behavior. And it struck me that this is important for our reputation work, and that maybe when we measure reputation, it shouldn't be about measuring individuals. Rather, it should be about measuring clusters of social networks. And that might do two things. It might, I have a lot of concerns that our good intentions about building reputation models also has sort of some of the problems associated with what's called surveillance capitalism. And Ben has talked about this. Like, you know, part of the point of beneficial AI is to build things in a way that isn't exploited, right? But if we're becoming monitors of each other, how do we prevent that turning into something that becomes perverse? And maybe one way to cut through that is that we don't build reputation models about individuals in the community. Rather, we build reputation models about social networks in the community.
Really like the idea, because very often, for example, when you have people gaming the system, it's very often because they have their own, let's say, individual interest, right? And put their individual interest very often above the interest of the group or the network. And usually we can't even blame the people, because the systems which we design usually incentivize the sort of behavior. They even champion and favorize it, right? So
Yeah.
this is really interesting.
The way I was
especially
thinking about it too, Phil, it's like, just to build a little and let you continue, is that if you were building the reputation on the social network, then there's also peer pressure to kind of maintain good social networks. You know, so if someone in your social network maybe is doing some things that are more selfish rather than collaborative, the group kind of has to take some responsibility for that person's behavior.
What is really interesting in this point, actually, let's assume, for example, we would have contribution tokens, which are distributed to engaged contributors, actually, in this regard. So by default, we set up an ever-growing library of data, right? Of, let's say, verified contributions within the ecosystem. Over time, it will become very difficult to handle this data. Well, you can put some sort of dashboards up, but just coming back to what Curtis mentioned before, LLM as communicator to data sets, right? So to see when we have social networks, we might not have them in the go because they need to form at first through the more, let's say, engagements which are built at DeepFunding. But having the LLM reading through the contributions to categorize or identify social networks and actually in this regard, and you wouldn't have to rely on a human which now needs to go into all the data set, figures out how to best work with the data, setting up some sort of, for example, knowledge graph, and then starting to map out, let's say, the social networks, for example. So LLM fed into, let's say, the contribution track or data set could help to identify social networks. And once these are in, because first we have to identify before we can start to incentivize them. To say, cool, once they get identified, then we can think about, okay, how do we incentivize these networks then rather than individuals?
Right, exactly. Yeah, the networks are you know, because we have a public ledger, you know, the social networks aren't really very hard to define because it's just the transactions between wallets that form a social network.
All right.
Since I have my hand up and I don't hear anybody else talking, it's interesting. And Kenrick, you raise a question when you bring up the surveillance society. When the black box of credit scoring first started, there was no opting out, and it penalized people for having cash and not using credit cards. And over 20, 40 years now, it has forced and it has helped governments drain cash from people's pockets into a credit card, thus tracking and surveillance system. You stated, and this is stated as a way of increasing voting power, but there's no way to opt out of it from what I see other than by not voting. And voting and increasing my score thus brings a potential black box 10, 20, 30 years. Not that I'll be alive that long, but some of you will be. But it brings on the blockchain a potential evolution similar to Equifax and the black box of credit scoring. So how do you opt out of this?
That's a great question, Tommy. If you don't mind, Felix, I'll push forward with an idea that I don't think is on people's minds, but I think is relevant to this discussion. And that is the following. Here's what I've been thinking about in terms of this whole effort is why do we have reputation risk at all? And at the heart of the problem is that when we do private transactions, each of us is kind of responsible for the risks involved in those transactions. And, you know, you basically take your gains and losses as you make good decisions about the transactions you're involved in. And so, yes, you have to measure, like you have to know the street cred, Tommy, right, of the people you're interacting with, but it's your responsibility. On the other hand, what we're trying to do in Singularity Net and these other cryptocurrencies is manage a public treasure and other public decisions. And that's where, we have a huge reputation risk because people are incentivized to kind of be exploitive of that public treasure. But it turns out that there are solutions to this. And here's an interesting thing that I've only really just recently come to fully understand. You started, Felix, by saying that we've implemented quadratic voting for the Singularity Net community. I thought so until I reread Glenn Weil's papers on quadratic voting. And I realized we haven't actually implemented quadratic voting, because quadratic voting, as he proposed it, had nothing to do with weighting wealth. What it had to do with is weighting the strength of your conviction about a public choice. And we have not implemented that. In other words, we have this dial from 0 to 10 on our proposal. So we've got both components, but we don't have them pieced together. You're supposed to weight, like if you vote neutrally, then that doesn't cost you anything. But if you vote 10 or 0, that costs a lot, is sort of how it's supposed to work. But there's another step that no one's ever done. And I've talked to Glenn Weil about this. Even in his own work, no one's done this experiment. Is that the original design cut through the whole problem of reputational risk, because it wasn't a equity snapshot like we're all doing in cryptocurrency now. Rather, it was an actual payment to the community. And so now you bear the cost of acting poorly, because you have to pay the community for your votes. Everybody gets that payment equally. But now, like, if I want to try to be exploitive of a particular decision by having a very high vote on that, well, I have to pay a whole lot for it. And that now I have a much more difficult calculation to make of how much is this project worth to me? And I don't want to spend more than that on the project. So it's a big constraint. And I actually think it's a different way than we've been thinking about voting. But I think it's important that we think about it, because it could cut through this whole problem about reputational risk. Because it puts the burden back on the voter, who now has an actual cost for making mistakes.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, this track of thought, and I trying to think of like wallet, and perhaps this is clearer if have the example of something like DeFi, where you may have wallet A that has been drained and has gone through these protocols and like fucked up many times, compared to another wallet that hasn't got its wallet drained and seems like it has a much better reputation of the wallet owner, in DeFi terms we're talking. But I don't think that necessarily accounts for the learnings of that wallet owner. And I don't know how you would translate this into governance, because, for instance, with DeFi or with a wallet getting drained, if we're going to look specifically at the equity, you see the cost of someone's decision, someone's mistake. But with something like governance, if someone votes extreme rather than like temperatively, there's no repercussions on some level. But yeah, I wonder what you guys think about how to account for learnings, how those could be accessed, aggregated, or used.
So when we speak about learning, what is interesting is how does one proves that he has gained some knowledge on something. And I love what Andamio is doing actually in their regard to say, you want him to do something with their knowledge, right? Unless you have not been able to prove that you actually can make use of your knowledge, then it's difficult to prove that you actually have the knowledge. So actually going this path on PBL methodology, so to say, oh, okay, create a structure in which gained knowledge and learnings can actually be used. Let's say, for example, you want to make sure somebody knows how deep funding works. What is deep funding? What kind of outcomes do we actually need to envision to make sure, okay, somebody knows well about deep funding? Then you can set some stuff, for example, let's say, has submitted already proposals in 3 funding rounds, has reviewed proposals in 2 funding rounds, has joined X amount of town halls, engaged X amount on Discord. So assuming that you have actions which actually undermine, okay, this person got funded in deep funding, for example. When you have to prove that, okay, this person got funded in deep funding, it undermines already the person knows how to write a proposal. When the person has to now write a proposal, then he might have already some understanding of deep funding. It's actually designing this path or sort of path. So that literally learnings are always, let's say, actually communicated through student learning targets, that you first make sure what is important to learn or to be learned, and then defining targets like, okay, check. And maybe Roberto or Newman would like to speak a word to this, especially when it comes to how does this place into contribution then actually?
I think what we're talking about now, I'll vamp while Roberto gets something ready. I think what we're talking about is assessment in the sort of learning model. And you can assess people. For instance, you could say, oh, do they know anything about deep funding? And you could ask them a question, like a essay question, or you could say, that type of verbal knowledge. But experience can be measured by action. When you said, okay, well, if someone's been funded, then they know how to write a proposal. That's true. But then they also have a whole different set of experiences by going through the process. So I don't know. It's tough to ask. It's tough to ask I'm more of a theorist. I'm a more scientist rather than a practitioner in the education thing. So I'm much more interested in the philosophical things of assessment. Maybe Roberto can give us a clue on on the Andamio frame. Although we do measure contribution through these student learning targets and the successful completion of projects, but the experience is left to its own, left to the learner, left to the contributor's own thing. I think this goes to Curtis's point of an AI assessor, an AI evaluator can have many more data points. That complexity can be managed by the AI, and that's really what the AIs really are great at. And they're not easy graders, yeah.
I imagine it could be quite interesting. Perhaps this is completely a tangent, but looking at the different kinds of voters that you could model an agent of each of those different categories and then get them to actually talk to each other and see like what they think about it, of each other's voting. On some level, I understand the on extreme voting that it's not good in many cases, but I do think there is nuance to this, that if someone does feel strongly on something, yeah, I guess there are these interesting nuances which I can imagine can be kind of enabled with AI somehow, these discussing these nuances between different metrics. Yeah, no, go for it, Tibo.
I will say this, you say metrics, and I would say, like, what do you do with the reputation and what others do with your reputation? And that's basically because you're showing what are you capable of to other people by recognizing your thing. And every person has their own way of kind of doing that, but it pulls up reputation of an image of you. And you guys, to me, the space we are in, like this grant funding and this blockchain stuff, it's amazing because we actually never run out of money. It feels like it. But over time, there is always somebody is going to have to make a decision. And the most like presence you have with your skills to that particular moment, that's why reputation is the best useful tool. For example, the first time we run, okay, not the first time, but like several runs into funding, you're gonna look through people who are doing similar proposals, especially if you're an open source and you want to do collaborative. You look people who have the same skills, and then you look for people who could fit to the position you are not capable of, and then look at his past experience, how capable he is, does he even have time, and what's his relation. So yeah, measuring by their long-term consistency of what did they say they do, did it, and did they do it, and then also having the contribution trail is just good tool to have, I guess, nowadays, to prove that and make this pattern easily noticeable.
I see, hands up.
Okay, let me try to go first. Okay, yeah, so excuse me. Yeah, maybe this question will speak more to Kenrick. I would like to hear his opinion on this. Can we have a plutocracy of reputation? Because we're talking about, we most time put the focus on, whenever we're talking about plutocracy, we focus it a lot on certain people who have a lot of wealth and they can use that to actually influence decision. And so we trying to move over to reputation as a means to try to balance out. So I'm just thinking, so reputation itself, can we have a plutocracy of it? And what does that look like? And how is your system balancing all of this?
I think that's true. I think that's a legitimate concern that we need to work on and stay focused on. And as I said, if you look up the articles by Eric Posner and Glenn Weil on quadratic voting, they do a very good review of the weaknesses in democracy itself. Not even, like, we start from a framework of corporate voting where it's one share or one coin, one vote, and we know about the centralization control problems with that. But what they pointed out, and I didn't have a full appreciation for this until I read their articles more carefully, is that even a one person, one vote system has a tendency to converge to a majority faction that rules and a minority faction that gets abused. And however you weight the coins, you never actually cut through that problem. So like we weight it with quadratic voting, it changes the composition of the majority, but it doesn't solve the problem. Now we're going to weight it with reputation. And again, it's going to change the composition of the majority. And yes, we might select for a wiser majority, right? Because we selected for this reputation score. But it doesn't, at some level, I realize it doesn't actually solve the hard problem of making sure that you're building a plural system or community rather than a plutocracy or groups that are kind of somehow gain control over the community. And what this work by Weil actually dates, you know, it has its origins by work that economists were doing back in the 50s to understand the dynamics of voting systems. And what they provide proofs about, but you know, it's good to build more evidence of it in terms of practical use, is that it cuts through the majority and minority factions in the following way. You can still have majorities and you can still have groups that are modest in their opinions, but if there's a lot of people, then that majority can make decisions. However, if they make decisions in a way that really upsets a minority, and a minority gets more in stronger and stronger convictions that they want to do something a different way, then they have the ability to express that conviction by paying more to the public. You know, they'd have to maybe go through fundraising processes for their concern or some other mechanism to raise the support to, but they have a mechanism to, even though they're a minority, to express strongly their disagreement with a majority. And that apparently cuts through this problem of forming factions that dominate the decision making.
And just quickly, Roberto, before you go, just on this, we had a really good example to show that's actually really true. What Kenrick mentioned, like if you have a crowd of 100 people and you just have 10 who align, they will game the whole 90 people. So there was, for example, in very early Catalyst days, it was able in the town hall to submit comments, and then Dogabash, the host, he would read out the most upvoted comments. So what we did with a small group, we rambled on some stupid comments. Then we just have been 10, 12 people upvoting them, pushed them directly to the top, and knew that we were the only ones aligned on this, and gamed the whole system and have been pretty sure that our comments always will be read. So so we put really stupid stuff in there, but it was a nice experiment. But it's exactly what Kenrick mentioned, actually.
Yeah.
Roberto.
You're devious, Felix.
So to me, it's really interesting because we talk about the voting systems, and they're really, if you think about voting systems in society, they are based on philosophical principles. Democracy is the government of majority, and then you have the tyranny of the majority. Monarchy is God-given power. Constitutionalism, totalitarianism, there's a finger on the scale, and the finger is supposed to direct society towards an outcome. And so my first question would be really, what is the philosophy behind what the system wants to be? What does it want to incentivize? And I would argue that will depend on every single decision that's being taken. You're going to want certain types of expertise or certain types of reputation, let's say, will be more appropriate for whatever decision is being made at that time. And also, in terms of identity or reputation, if you think about it, and also goes maybe to privacy and the role that AI might have in deciding what kind of assigning value to that, our identities, our reputations are very layered. You have your familiar reputation, you have your professional reputation, you have your reputation with your friends, and even inside your family, it can be compartmentalized. My brothers don't know me the same way that my wife knows me, that my mother knows me. It's very, very distinct, and it has obviously, you behave a little bit differently depending on the context that you're interacting with. And I think in terms of your reputation or how you are perceived in the system that we're trying to create, the blockchain is trying to create, it needs to be sort of the same, right? The API needs to understand those really, really nuanced parts of your behavior within that system. And also, the only other thing I wanted to talk about, just wanted to say, is Dr. Ulieru, which was some time working with IOG, she has some really interesting papers on something that she calls emergent engineering. And it's this idea of when you create complex systems, thinking about sort of how do you regulate the whole system always has its flaws, because you cannot contemplate all the different variables of a complex system. So she sort of suggests this, sort of like how starlings communicate and coordinate each other. When you see a flock of starlings and they move in a unison, despite not really even, they're not obeying, there's not a central rule, there's no hierarchy. They just sort of communicate with their neighbors. And that's kind of one of the reputation systems. She does like this evaluation of a framework of different reputation systems. And some of them were just, what are your reactions? What are your relationships with your nearest neighbor? And that's how, so the only person that knows you in some sort of, some context is the person that you interact with. That's street cred. You have certain street cred because people that have interacted with you in a certain context, Wall Street or whatever, you're in the neighborhood, though they know you in a certain way because you've proven, let's say, like Felix said about how you contribute, that you can do or know certain things. So that creates your reputation. And I feel like, so if you think about that in that sense, you sort of, and that's what I meant by emergent engineering, you can think about it as you have reputation, which allows you to behave or opt into sort of certain things like lending or just doing business. And then you have sort of a top-down just set of rules, which you would say is the law, is the Constitution, and it gets evolved as society or whatever decides, well, we need to regulate this more, we need to stop regulating this, we don't want people to smoke, so we'll stop doing that, we don't want the whatever, so we'll tax more. Or like in the States, it's a little bit different because you have just like the Bill of Rights and it's very specific. But like from where I come from, the Constitution is a lot larger, I guess. And it has different aspects of how it regulates your life in your different capacities, familiar, professional, whatever. And so you have all these sort of boundaries to what you can do as a group, like Kendrick said, like as a network. But you also have these sort of positive reinforcements as you sort of move along that system with neighbors. So you kind of get a grasp, and as a whole, you know kind of how to behave. Because once you get out of those rules, you get punished. And so your reputation or whatever gets lowered. But if you sort of act within the system, so to the benefit of the whole, I guess, you are rewarded. You get positive feedback. So I thought that theory of sort of bottom-up design of complex systems was super, super interesting. And I think there's a lot to learn from other disciplines. Like I would really like, I think the law and how these government systems have been created and the concepts of which they are based can be really useful when we think of analogs in a world where we're trying to just create this privacy, right? This reputation that is not based on who you are as a person, but also your interactions and your behavior allows you to have more decision power and where that decision is valuable and where it is not so valuable, I guess. That is all.
I just want to close. This was awesome, Roberto. I love your mind, dude.
Am I up again? I thought there was someone before me.
I think there was.
Roberto pretty much said it all. I did just want to like connect with those trust networks and the purpose of reputation being exactly what Roberto said, and I take a lot of inspiration from how Gimbal Labs is sort of deploying their credential system. Gimbal Labs is compiling the metrics. It's just, hey, here's what you completed, here's the assessments you did, here's the courses you took, here's the experience, the project that you worked on. But Gimbal Labs does not say that you're worth this or you're worth that. It's up to the independent organization or independent individual to determine how they value that system. And I love that. So everything you said, Roberto, I think applies very different.
Yeah, Ben Gertzel said something similar in a meeting we had with him last month. We came up with this image of, you kind of collect all kinds of input data like you're describing, and that maybe goes into a computational engine. But then you have to be able to make all kinds of different inferences depending on the choice you're trying to make. And he said, and I thought this was also important, that the purpose of a reputation system is to make a probability prediction about performance on something in the future. And so it depends, like Roberto was getting at, the context is everything, because your performance depends completely on what you're trying to do. You know, I used to like to play the guitar until my son blews me away, and now I can't even pick it up because I just feel too embarrassed. Yeah. But but there's other things, so we're all good at different things, but it depends on the context, and so it's not one metric was the important point to get across. It is maybe carefully with security and with the concerns like Tommy raised about being able to collect what people have achieved and then allowing, again, securely people to kind of process those achievements into a metric of performance on a particular task. So you can make a choice whether that individual or that group is the right person for that task.
Real quick, because there was a previous comment talking about knowledge, and in my opinion, knowledge is, and I think it's similar to what Felix said, knowledge is the lessons learned from an experience. So it's the experience that's really adding the value, and then if you learned lessons, that's turned into knowledge and insight, and that's the value that you're trying to discover, right? And you are looking for specific information, specific experiences, so you can value them. I love it. Thank you, Kenrick.
This is so good because, Roberto, what you mentioned, this was actually a really good question as well. What is the philosophy behind? I think we didn't thought about this so far. We thought about the utility, about the function, about, okay, what does it place, but not really, let's say, on, okay, the philosophic part. I think what really comes together from my side already, Kurt, is what you just mentioned, right? Knowledge in this regard is really based on experiences. And tying this to what Kenrick mentioned, like why most of the systems actually favor and champion, incentivize individual behavior, but not forcefully incentivizing how you interact with your social network. And we say a good and strong interaction of the contributor with its social network is an experience we want to increase and ideally manifest through the token and create some sort of incentive for this. This is something what will definitely, this is awesome takeaway already from the stuff. This is insane, guys.
But wouldn't you say we little already do that by recognizing participation? You recognize multiple people being in the same space and time.
But you always reward them for their individual contributions, right? But not how these contributions are actually, let's say, received from their social environment. for example, right now, let's say, for example, Ambassadors program, we have guilds and war groups, and we send rewards to individuals. But right now, at this point, we currently ignore how are the individuals actually acting in their groups, and what impact do they actually bring there? How is it received? How is their contribution received from the environment? There's something what we don't have on our screen yet at all.
I actually love what Tivo just asked, and then what you said, Felix. I think we are internally, everybody is doing what you said, Tivo. We're all analyzing and evaluating and building out that trust network, but we can't share it. Like, I can't, unless I make that bridge and I say, hey, Roberto and Felix and I had this previous experience, I'm going to share that with you. But a reputation system enables, I feel like, the community to really share their experiences.
How do you measure environment receiving reputation? It's so hard question, and I'm getting stuck here.
I'm asking myself exactly the same. How would you? What would be the signals for such a thing?
I really like the way Kenrick talked about it, and it's at inference. So, and this is the same question I feel like we're asking here. What is the purpose of contribution tracking? What is the purpose of reputation? That's how you approach these metrics at inference, is what am I looking for? Do I need somebody I can trust and count on? Like, how often did this person miss meetings or whatever? That's at inference. You can actually discover some of that. So it's really, what are your desired outcomes? And I love to reference behavioral motivation mechanisms. What are your intents? And then those inform how you evaluate the metrics that are available.
So you say that your intent is what environment needs. But then it's still individual, because every person has their own intent, so the environment is collection of intentions.
I think you also need a goal, because like you would measure how your behavior has impacted the collective to reach the goal, to move forward, to reach that goal. And that's what I mean by a philosophical like underlining to everything, because otherwise you're moving, but in what direction? You're moving backwards. Did your interaction confuse everyone and then it stalled that movement, or did it move it forward? Not for yourself, but for the collective, right? You're moving towards what? That's kind of the question where you need to sort of take into account when you're deciding, I guess, how do you value something?
Yeah, this is a point that me and Felix were discussing a bit before the call, actually, about how I quoted Slavoj Žižek. He's got a beautiful quote. I'll copy it in here. But he basically says the problem is not inactivity or passivity, but pseudo activity. So how can these mechanisms fight against this pseudo activity where it seems like things are going on, but actually there isn't? Slavoj Žižek says, subjectively, it's the hardest thing to actually step back and not interact with these systems when they are to interact in these systems in a way that just keeps them going. It's rather better to disengage in these scenarios. Wonder what you think on that when it comes to governance and voting.
So I'm waiting in case someone wants to react to what Fly said, because somewhat my contribution would be somehow circling us back to the beginning of the conversation. So I was trying to ensure that we have that flow first before I do that. but I guess I just have to speak now. So basically, like our conversation so far just keep popping up something in my mind. Then is the introduction of AI into the contribution or reputation score as a mechanism. Is it actually a good thing or bad thing? Because if we are able to establish that even the reputation itself has to be philosophically tied to something, and we know that AI mostly are built on parameters and metrics, so it's only going to be looking at the objectivity and not the philosophical and the implied essence of that. We're going to be missing something, right? So that, like, all of this was just popping in my mind. Then intrinsically, do we need to actually tie in AI into any such reputation score, being that AI is actually looking for metrics and parameters, and we are talking about reputation being able to be linked to philosophy here. That's it. And then, yeah, I think that summarizes everything that has been going on in my head.
I love those questions, and I ask that very same question in almost any AI implementation. Is the desire to actually automate, some of the decisions? And in my opinion, no. Like what we've just discussed here is everybody can value that person's reputation and so on and so forth differently, where every organization is going to need different value systems from that reputation system. So it sounds like some of your concerns come from it making deterministic outputs, whereas I don't think that's the intent. The intent is for AI to aggregate and provide insight into it that maybe you wouldn't be able to do on your own without hours and hours of research. So it's more about populating the information so that humans can value that information, not necessarily taking it to the next level and say, oh, you're not allowed to be in this group because your reputation score is too low. That to me would be a bad decision.
Somewhat, but yeah, so okay, so let's take that very first level of that discussion in itself. So AI most times, to be able to even gather that, but it has to understand what are the most important things to gather. It doesn't gather every information. That's not what the AI does. It will gather what it feels is important to the conversation or to the reputation. So, and this is where it's very slick, right? Because for us to be able to do that, no matter how we try to run away from it, we will always have to be deterministic to tell him this is the data we feel is relevant. These are the things we feel, and then somebody has to train the data to actually the AI to be able to bring out the insight and all of those kind of stuff. So that is where all of this is very tricky, because intrinsically, so when we were having that whole conversation, I was trying to be real and having conversations in my head with nearly everyone I've actually met in this particular space. And what those values were quite different. Sometimes it could just be that I felt like I would like to work with this person just because of how punctual the person is. Sometimes it could just be how the person is actually receiving other people's opinion, not necessarily the person's contribution. He's not even saying anything, but he's very receptive. And so we have, and human experiences are not things that are deterministic. We can't say these are the 100 experiences that combines to make human experience. Our experiences are simulations in a way, and they keep changing patterns by pattern, but they keep creating essence and meaning in a way. So this is where all of this is very tricky. And I'm just being very real when I'm asking myself, like, do we then really need to put AI as into this equation, being how tricky the whole reputation system is in reality?
I would say right now it's too early for AI solution, I would say, and it's more practical level of what do you want to measure, and then also have retrospectives did measuring that help? Who gamified? And once you have the critical mass data that it's constantly like beaming in every week, every month or so, and then you use AI, and that you actually kind of already mentioned that, but in different perspective, Daniel, that you use AI to recognize patterns, and then you are going to look for these gamification mechanics or these bad behaviors you already see, you have already had experience, you have had retrospectives, and then you use, okay, this is the type of thing and the reputation he built upon, we are found out this is actually fake. Can you find something similar? And then the AI is basically giving you insight and suggestion. So it's a tool for person to kind of proactively look at the same pitfalls that they usually found after experiment was over.
To what you're saying, we are in the role sort of, and that needs to be deterministic. I've actually kind of, I like, I'm not technical, so I just wonder about this from another point of view, but it's something that's kind of sort of like an opportunity or an option, and it seems like something that maybe Gimbal Labs does, and people recognize as good as sort of only recognizing the good, maybe minimizing the bad, and something that maybe AI is well suited to do is just almost aggressively finding out what you are good for and pointing you in that direction. This is maybe sounds a little bit corny, but it's sort of like unconditional love, right? And it's a principle of rehabilitation, because what rehabilitation, good rehabilitation, tries to do is just correct the sort of toxic sort of feedback that you may have gotten at some point in your environment. It recognizes that you are, maybe humans, and this is philosophical, are not inherently evil or bad, maybe neutral or good, whatever. So it just presupposes that when you do wrong, there's something wrong around you. It's not you yourself. It's just you're getting negative feedback. You're getting negative signals from your environment. So maybe the point is just to surface every good thing you do and sort of minimize the bad, and interpret that in a way for, okay, so this person is just messed up here. We're not going to punish. We're just going to eliminate that for now. Look at the behavior and see where we can point you in the right direction. I don't know if that's something even possible, but to me, that would be sort of the point of a system like this, that is blind to who you are in terms of the biases or prejudices that we might have culturally as people, and just focuses on your actions, right? But I don't know.
Berto, if we could just like podcast, that's what we need. We need a podcast, right? With Roberto on there. No, I love it. And I agree. Children's psychology is very similar in the sense that if you say no a lot, they're going to continue that behavior, and that's probably predominantly what you're going to see. But if you promote the good behavior, they're going to actually be more towards that and less of the negative behavior. But in my opinion, the negativity, I guess, as it's constructed, is valuable as well. It has its place, and that's it's seen as lessons learned. You know, those experiences, this is what maybe I could have done differently, or the environment could have been changed. I'm going to apply that in the future, while simultaneously elevating the positive, outcomes. It's a bit of an unbiased result, where you can actually look into what is considered negative with that filter of, hey, these are the lessons that we learned. So I think it just plays a crucial tool in the sandbox, and not just completely ignoring it. But everything you said, I completely agree with.
Yeah, you can't eliminate the learning experience from failure. Yeah.
I think that's sometimes really the drawback on humans, right? We always have to weight anything what we interact with on a very subjective manner. We are emotionally attached to everything. And it's literally impossible to go beyond of good and bad, right? State things without, or observe things or take things without judging them. And going into this direction to say, because I'm agree with Roberto, like, in this regard, good and bad is a human thing, actually, a little bit on this regard, mostly weighted to our, let's say, emotions, philosophies, morals, whatnot we have cultivated for ourselves. And in this regard, maybe using AI for more objective, let's say, subjective, detached source of information in this regard, where you might be able to have some more unbiased reflections actually on the stuff, and can take as humans a little bit into more the backseat and say, oh, okay, cool, let's observe, let's treat this data without judging the data. For example, I love also to say, don't blame the people, blame the system. And don't be angry about the person, just be maybe disagree with his action sometimes. We're all humans, and even the best human will do stupid shit from time to time, because that's how we are built, right? And just because one good person does a stupid thing doesn't mean the person is not stupid, right? And which comes also back to this philosophy then actually also on what should the token actually reflect and incentivize in this regard. This would maybe be a really important topic that ideally incentivizes a non-biased, let's say more objective way by empowering individuals and not judging them on their actions, even if they do a misstep. And system is able to identify it and say that was a very stupid action, then anyway be in a way to take this as a non-judged, let's say, set of information and treat it elsewise than a person would treat it maybe. Would say, yeah, let's kick this person out, you're a bad human. Like, no, give him time, give him a chance. Change the system so that you can evolve and develop. Though there's a limit as well, right? I would have still very little tolerance, for example, a neo-fascist joining these meetings and hating around about everybody, whatnot, right? So there also has to be somebody who wants to share child porns or shit like this, like that. No, wait, there's a limit somewhere as well. And at some point, no judgment will not work anymore, especially when we think about the social networks then, right? Because neo-fascists also have the social networks. Child porn enthusiasts also have the social networks. And just because they have social networks, maybe doesn't forcefully mean, in our case, this is something what we want to incentivize. So we have already this really difficult thing. Because if we say, oh, okay, we want to observe any innovation, any information without judgment, then this would include neo-fascists and child porn lovers as well. Right? But this is actually something we want. So read this topic of the philosophy behind. I think this is so important to really deeply think about.
Can you share maybe a resource or a link on that, Felix? Because I'd love to explore that. Personally, I don't observe good and bad or good and evil. It's challenging for me to even comprehend what that means. But the act of judging and my perception of that, I think, differs. You're right. I don't think we can not judge. That is just human nature. That is sort of how we evaluate the reality around us. It's actually, I think, how we manifest the reality around us is the perception of reality. And the act of judging is really just, how does this information align with my perspective of reality, and how does it benefit my perspective of reality? If it doesn't fit in, or if it doesn't benefit, then it's deemed bad in some degree. Whereas that again, it's playing a tool. So if an organization is determining an action or an activity is bad, that's just because it knows what its reality looks like, and it's determining whether or not that particular activity or behavior is beneficial to that environment. So it's not necessarily a judgment, it's just an evaluation of, is this a desired activity and does it align with our reality? And in SNET, it's your mission, your vision, and your purpose. What is, again, the intent of it? That's the reality of SingularityNet. So do these activities and do these behaviors benefit that and align with the truth of that reality? That's sort of the judgment, I would say. So is it better to not judge, or is that a requirement that we have to sort of assess that and say, does it what are the desired behaviors essentially.
Love it. Love it. Absolutely.
Well, same here. And looking also on the time, we are a little bit over an hour already. So don't want to take too much of everybody's time and people jumping off already step by step. Any last words, comments someone would like to add?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and say I joined late because my timing is still messed up. So I thought 7 UTC is 3 p.m. where I am. So I joined an hour late. So I'm really upset that I missed a lot of great conversation. But thank you so much for everyone that joined. And I'm gonna watch the recording and yeah, next time hopefully I'll be around for the actual conversation.
Any last comments? Thoughts?
I'm just like Dr. Kendrick said, like I'm really curious now. This proposal, like how does SNet make a contribution token, knowing, like we know the pitfalls, we've had these conversations, like let's make something awesome and let's not be afraid to try and fail. Like I would, yeah, I'm really now looking forward to it. It'll be cool. It'll be a great experiment and it will give us all an experience that we can carry on to the next round. Because this isn't going away. Contribution tokens aren't going away. Reputation networks and social stuff like this is not going away. So the work we're doing is really valuable. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I really appreciate the space to just kind of talk. I think especially within the context of getting to AGI, it's really important to sort of think about what it means to be human, right? And what is the goal of existence, pretty much, right? If AGI is going to do everything for us, then what's the point? What is there to do after that? And I was reading a book and it was like, is AGI and all these computers doing our thinking for us necessarily bad? And one of the sort of reflections was maybe it just frees up time to have more conversations around maybe things like this. And I think maybe this might not seem like going forward, but I think it's important to have spaces where you just kind of think and talk and maybe sometimes just like Fly said, just be silent, right? Do nothing or say nothing. But I do feel like there is some lack of reflection on what it means and what is it all about, right? It's not just moving forward and designing or creating stuff. It's just, what is it for at the end of the day, for us, because it's us that is doing it, and it will be us who suffers the repercussions, good or bad.
It was a beautiful note. Also, then with that, and last notice also on Newman, like the proposal was submitted in Ideation Pool in DeepFunding Round 3, and proposals in the Ideation Pool, the whole pool was actually about if you have a concept, but not yet enough framework structure designed to really develop it, then you go in Ideation Pool, submit your proposal there, work out all the details, which you need to actually go into real development of the whole stuff. And it's definitely a road we will go down to. And for sure, everything what comes to a DeepFunding token will not be developed behind closed doors. That's 400% sure. Needs to be done by the community and collective. So definitely looking forward then to, ideally we close out this proposal next week already on December 8th. Did we even sign the contract already? I think we did just today. So just boxing his through. Then having a nice documentation in place, a recommendation, and ideally a follow-up. And maybe some follow-up where some people here, when you said, hey, you became really interested in this topic, maybe there's some you would like to join the thing later and say, hey, let's collaborate, let's get some brains together. Because we figure out a bunch of topics through these workshops already, which are just so important to think about. And ideally, yeah, you will be happy to take an active lead in moving this forward. Because right now we are 4 people. We can't do this alone, that's for sure. And yeah.
Awesome.
Awesome. And Newman, I really like that short story. I do recommend a lot of people read it. I sent it to all my young cousins, so
Oh yeah.
It paints a good picture. It's called Two Sides of Humanity by Marshall Brain. Mana. It's just a good short read. But
it's a quick, yeah, super quick read, and it contextualizes a lot of the sort of the downside and the possibilities. It's nice. Yeah. All right, John. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
See you
everybody.
later. Ciao. Yeah.
Awesome. And
Thanks.
thanks a lot everybody for taking the time. That's really matters a lot and it's deeply appreciated. For being around here, spending your time, your most valuable thing with us together. You're awesome. And let's build something good together. Let's make sure we make our small part in making sure humanity goes into the right direction. Maybe we build a bunch of stuff to build it in the wrong direction, and we don't know yet. And humans in 50 years will look on recordings and say, "These stupid fuckers, they have been part of this shit." Let's move back and kill them all.
Isn't that what we do 50 years ago? We look back and go, man, those guys are idiots.
100%. That is exactly. We did not know, it had not happened yet. We did not know, and we just asked for forgiveness. Yeah. Best intentions. Yeah. That is exactly. I'm preparing myself for that for certain.
If only we can capture intentions, then everything would be easy.
Oh, maybe that's our contribution, our reputation token. Like maybe that has, that's in it. Oh.
I love it. The first hurdle though is, can anybody here actually verbalize their intentions right now? That's kind of a
force
challenge.
people to do a lot of introspection. As humans, we've really gone away from like looking within first. So I think it's a good exercise.
We need to go for a walk and then write some stuff down. That helps.
I like that.
Already next year, we plan a festival off the grid. Everybody brings his tent and some food for themselves and some food surplus. We meet somewhere in the mountains and the forest. Bring some mushrooms, LSD. We put some bonfires, having a good time and figuring stuff out.
Nice.
No, we are really planning this. I'm not kidding, actually. We are really going for this.
Nice.
Keep us involved, because I know you mentioned it like, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, kind of as a joke, and I'm fully on board for it. Yeah.
Thanks, yeah.
Awesome.
Bye, guys.
Well, bye, guys. Thank you so much. Bye.
Why? Can you stop recording?